Welcome back from break, everyone. This is our first Dean panel of the afternoon, and I'm going to start it off by allowing the speakers to introduce themselves, starting at the far end.
My name is Dr. Ron Berezniak. I'm Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs at the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine in Bradenton, Florida.
I'm Dr. Gabe Garcia. I'm Professor of Medicine and Dean of Admissions at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Good morning. I'm Dr. George Rausch, Associate Dean for Diversity Affairs at Indiana University School of Medicine, and we have a vision at IU, the Indiana University School of Medicine family where diversity is an everyday reality.
Mekbib Gemeda, I'm Assistant Dean for Diversity Affairs and Community Health at New York University School of Medicine.
I'm David Wofsy. I'm Associate Dean for Admissions at the University of California, San Francisco.
Good morning. My name is Dr. George Hill. I'm from Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, which is east of here.
Dr. Mitch Heiseroth. I'm the Vice Chair of the OMM Department at Touro University College of Osteopathic Medicine in Vallejo, California.
Leon McDougall, MD, MPH, from the Ohio State University College of Medicine in Columbus.
I'm Bill McDade. I'm an anesthesiologist and a biophysicist on the faculty at the University of Chicago, and I'm also Associate Dean for Multicultural Affairs.
All right, if you would join me now in welcoming all of these deans to our conference. All right, a little more than a week ago, we sent out via our website kind of questions that we wanted to get from our audience and our attendees. So we've compiled those questions, and we're going to ask our different deans here today what everyone out here pulled as the most popular questions from what they want to hear from experts in their field. So we're going to get started. If Dr. Garcia could answer this first question. A lot of these schools are transferring to the new MMI process of interviews. Do you believe that that's a good transition to be making, and do you have any comments to make on the transition old versus new?
Stanford will be interviewing using the MMI technique beginning this November. We chose to go this way because it is a valid way of predicting the clinical skills that our applicants will demonstrate in the future. In some ways, we didn't choose it because it was a perfect system, but we chose it because it was a much better improvement over the standard non-structured interview technique that most of us use today. There's approximately a dozen U.S. schools, and all of the Canadian schools are switching to this system this year.
All right, and then with Dr. Hisaro, I know you have worked at an for the DOs. Do you have? Are you also switching over to the new MMI system? Do you feel that it takes a different approach based off of what you look for in your applicants?
At this time, as I understand it, we're not switching over. We're going to continue to do the interview process as we have in the past. We're quite happy with the way that it's been delivering the kind of students that we believe understand osteopathic medicine and have a vision towards becoming osteopathic physicians as opposed to being an allopathic physician. There is some differences that are required, and we try to work that out through our interview process, so at this time, no.
Okay, excellent. And then if we could have any one of the deans explain a little bit about why maybe their school is switching over and what the MMI process is, and why they switched over to it.
Who else is switching?
Anybody?
I can tell you why we're not.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
We may be the only school that's switching, and it'd be good to do it, the pro and con with David, actually. In some ways, we were seeking a valid way of getting at the personal qualities of our applicants, and we were doing it predominantly so that we could avoid the high-risk, idiosyncratic sort of global assessment of each individual interviewer, so to turn 2 high-risk interviews into a series of relatively low-risk interviews. But that was the driver of our decision.
And Dr. Wofsy, do you want to explain why you're not switching over?
So I share the view that the MMI is an intriguing way to look at people. But from our perspective, we interview 500 people. They're all wonderful. They're all going to go into medicine. They're going to go to some school somewhere and make a contribution to society. We think of our interview day primarily as an opportunity to recruit and not as an opportunity to judge. And it's our philosophy, actually, that the interview carries too much weight in this process. You get 500 people, they're highly selected, you think they're all wonderful, all that's left is the interview or the MMI, so it sorts. If it goes well, you're in. If it doesn't go well, you're out. I don't think the interview should sort. I don't think it's more important than how you've done over the course of an academic career. I don't think it's more important than the things you've chosen to do in your extracurricular activities. I don't think it's more important than the things the people who know you well and write letters about you have to say about you. So we try very hard to keep the interview in perspective and not to exaggerate its importance in the process. It matters. We keep it in perspective in a different way than the MMI, and that is we do a blind interview at UCSF. The faculty member or the student who's interviewing you hasn't seen your file. And when they're done with the interview, they write a narrative of what it was like to interview you. No score. It's in effect, what was it like to meet this person? And when the interview reports are in the file becomes available to the whole committee. And we hope that what that means is that the last thing they're looking at are all the things you've sent to us. Your academic record, your extracurricular activities, your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, and that becomes the last and most important thing in the minds of the committee when they view things. So it's a little bit of a different philosophy about the interview.
Could I share the thoughts at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine? And that is we consider the interview as one of many, many components in doing a holistic evaluation of the application. So we have now added this year some standardized questions that all of the students will be answering. But the interview represents, I serve on our admissions committee as well as Associate Dean for Diversity, and the interview is just one of many, many components that we consider. An interview can't get you in, but it certainly can keep you out. So we really believe that holistic approach is essential.
Yeah, I think we can all agree it's very important to know for what school you're applying to, what their approach is to interviews, whether or not you take a blind approach, the old-fashioned approach, or definitely the MMI approach. And which, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, stands for multiple mini-interviews. And it's where you're going to meet, instead of sitting down in a room and have one long interview session, you actually have kind of like speed dating and get to sit down with multiple people who will interview, ask different questions. And so they can all kind of, if you have a bad experience at one, then maybe you had a really great experience at another, and it gives you, I think some people believe it provides a different way to develop the full character of the interviewees. But I think we'll move on to our next question now, which is a really popular one that seems like it has a couple different answers for different schools about how you weight either disparity between or MCAT versus GPAs, how you look at that just basically for applications. Does anybody want to comment on that?
I will comment on that. New York University School of Medicine looks at the GPA has obviously a bigger meaning than the MCAT because it's a longer period that you have spent doing your work. So looking at the GPA, not only the GPA score itself, but how you have performed over time, what courses you have taken at different times of your college, all is meaningful, and that is meaningful in the context of also what you've been doing while you're doing that. Were you working 20 hours a week while you were taking all those courses? or were you doing it just on its own? So that has a large meaning to your application than, you know, the simple MCAT score that you take at one time itself. But on the other side, the MCAT has also some validity in terms of, you know, seeing how you prepare for a one-time big taste, big test that you will encounter in medical school, and therefore it has something that it measures as well. So that is how we kind of weigh the two things that you come with.
As a physician, you rarely will ever make a decision about how you're going to treat a patient on a single variable. You must take a look at as many different angles of this patient as you can. And through that, you come to a best case scenario, what you believe is going on, how to deal with them. So you get a gestalt about what's happening with this patient. And just like selecting a good medical student, the MCAT as well as the GPA serve as some data points at which we look at. But no one really holds the key for us to understand who will be a great physician for us to represent the profession well and themselves. And so there are minimal standards in order to sort of to keep the some 4,000 applicants every year so that we understand how we can get it to a handleable way. But in the end, you know, who you are and why you're coming really serves as a really large portion about how we decide what sort of physician we will select.
At Indiana University, we take somewhat of a unique perspective, a little different perspective. I like to refer to it as we look for diamonds in the rough. Now, the MCAT, the GPA are certainly a part of the process, but we tend to focus more on the personal attributes, the non-quantifiable, the non-measurable sorts of things, leadership, exposure to medicine, well-roundedness, and several other factors. Those are the types of things that we look for. And over the course of being involved in medical education for about 35 years, I've staked my reputation on looking for those diamonds in the rough, those individuals who don't necessarily have the 30 MCAT. They may have a 20 or 21, and in some cases maybe even a 19. But if you provide the right types of support mechanisms, those individuals can be just as successful as individuals with a 30 or a 35 MCAT. And as we all know, a high MCAT or a low MCAT, a high GPA or a low GPA doesn't necessarily a good physician make. There are a lot of other factors that go into it, and those are the types of things that we focus on.
At the University of Chicago, we recognize that not everybody may start college with the same level of preparation. And those people who've had access to excellent high schools or preparatory schools may come into their first year of college with a leg up on some of the other students who haven't had such excellent preparation going into college. And so what we like to look at is an upward progression. That is, that if you didn't quite figure out how things were going when you first got to college, if you then worked very hard and became invested in the process of learning and were able to now turn it around so that you could start achieving those high grades that could close the gap between the starting points of you and your peers, then we value that sort of a learning trajectory. We also look at your MCAT score for one of a number of reasons, but we recognize that, in fact, in Jordy Cohn's paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association a few years ago, suggested that parental income was directly related to your MCAT score. So the higher your parents' income, the higher your MCAT score was. And so we take this into account when we're evaluating candidates for candidacy.
I really appreciate my colleague's comment because he was referring to the former president of the AAMC, Jordan Cohen, who is now at GW. And it's very clear, and at Vanderbilt, I think the admissions committee appreciates the fact that the performance of students, whether it's the GPA or the MCAT, really is influenced by many, many different factors. And so one has to consider that when one looks at the scores, and different groups have different averages for their MCATs. I think that's probably been one of the most important things we've been able to achieve at the institution. So if a person comes from a fantastic economic background and had tremendous opportunities, we would expect them to have a certain score. But if they come from a different group, then we certainly would expect something different. And then as one of the other panelists made the point, what we're looking for in the final analysis are people who are great physicians, who are caring, compassionate, warm, understand issues. And there is no standardized test that measures that.
Well, I think this brings us around to a great topic of non-traditional students and how important the personal statement is in an application. Dr. McDougall, if you would like to talk a little bit about some advice you can give to non-traditional students in writing the personal statement or to any applicant.
Okay, that's a great question. Also, I just want to touch on a bit in regards to the MCAT score and GPA. Don't look at, there's a number of different books. They'll post what the average MCAT score is and what the average GPA is for a student entering a specific school of medicine, osteopathic school, school of public health. That's the average. Associated with that average is a range. And based on your background will really help determine your attractiveness as a candidate, your background, and your expressed purpose for seeking whatever profession that you're interested in. And that speaks to the personal statement. It's very important, very important. It should be written by you, perhaps have someone look it over for grammar and syntax, but I know there's been some controversy in regards to there are a number of different services now where they'll write your personal statement and so forth. But see, that personal statement, if somebody else writes your personal statement, that's where that interview comes into play we've been talking about this morning. Well, you said here in your personal statement, so when you get into the interview and you don't mention anything that's in your personal statement, it says here that you saved the world. Tell us about that. How did you do that? And if you can't speak to that, there'll be a big disconnect, and that's gonna, you really can't fake an interview, and that's why interviews are important. You need to sit down and talk with folks, because we've all had experience here being on admissions committees and so forth, and if you didn't need to interview anybody, we just pick the students, just send in your paper, we'll just rank you and send you your admission. We don't even need to see you. So that interview is important. There are different ways on how to interview folks, and there's a lot of good evidence coming out now concerning that. But that personal statement is important. It should speak to why you need to be a physician. What impact are you going to make on this world? You really need to speak to that.
Dr. Berezniak, if you could speak a little bit on just kind of this general feeling of needing to have overcome diversity, being a non-traditional applicant. Well, does that mean that do schools look down on the stereotypical applicants who have a little bit of research, a little bit of clinical, decent scores? I mean, does that hurt you?
Well, at LECOM, we look at the applicant through a polyocular lens. That is, through many views. And one of the views is diversity. LECOM, for instance, according to U.S. News and World Report, is in the top 10 schools for accepting Hispanic students. We're really looking at diversity, and we're trying to put physicians where they need to be. And there's a lot of communities in the United States that need physicians. And so what we're trying to do is to recruit the best students from all different parts of the world. And the students that come to our school, they're very, very successful. And they go back home, a lot of them, into these small towns where they need docs. The osteopathic profession, a large percentage of people go into primary care. And that's what's needed, primary care in small towns. And if you're from a diverse population in a small town, and you want to go back, we're going to help you. We're going to help you get through med school. We're going to help you get through a residency and eventually get back to a place where you need to be.
I just wanted to touch on that question and the previous question regarding non-traditional students and how they should approach their statements. Non-traditional students should actually have more material for their essay, it seems, no? Because they are non-traditional, so there is more to actually talk about. And it's very important to think, in terms of diversity, when we talk about diversity, and then you mentioned the fact that what about students that have just the regular? But usually the fact is that the regular is not that regular if you reflect upon it, and the application process is supposed to be a very reflective process where you actually analyze your life a little bit and see like what were the things that drove you to where you want to come, and in many cases the problem is because there are so many cliches around of where you have to actually find the greatest disaster that really turned that point. You usually tend to forget the people and the events and the things in your life that may not look that great, but that were very, very meaningful. And if you put it in some context that really talk about you and not about this person, just this generic person that wants to be a physician. So it is very important to think in those terms.
One quick comment about the personal statement. Stay away from the cliches. I love working with people. I love people. It seems simple, but we see a lot of those kinds of statements. If you love working with people, be specific. Talk about the kinds of things you've done where you've worked with people, preferably in a medical setting or something related to that. So stay away from the cliches. They tend to be red flags to admissions committees.
That brings us to a good point. We've talked about a lot of things that make a good application good, but a couple of the things that make a bad application bad, things to avoid. Dr. McDade, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think the thing that makes an application bad is that there's any untruth in it. Because when your application is before the committee, what happens is everything that's in it becomes an issue that can be discussed during your interview at some point in the process. And as Dr. McDougall alluded, that if what's in your application doesn't jibe with what we get when we talk to you in the interview, then there's going to be a disconnect, and I think that will get you into trouble in your interview. I think that honor and truthfulness and integrity are hallmarks of what it takes to be a physician. And so if there's any aspect of that that throws that point into question during the application process, that gives grounds for the admissions committee to say, we've got so many other applicants to look at, why take a chance when there's a red flag that stands in that way? I'll leave some other comments for colleagues.
If I could comment on another aspect that makes an application really poor, it's the use of the word I a lot. I have done this. I feel that I'm one of the best students because of such and such. I have achieved. In other words, medicine is partnerships, working with people and cooperating with people. And if there's any sense of arrogance in your application, as Dr. McDade mentioned, the interviewer, the admissions committee will move on to another applicant. In other words, you don't want to give the impression that you feel that you're so important and so talented that the school really would be blessed by just your presence in the class. Keep that out of your application.
Dr. McDougall, I think you wanted to add something?
Honesty and integrity, and I'll just give you an example. Throughout the year, you'll have applicants, very strong GPA, MCAT-wise, and they may have had some institutional infraction while as a freshman in college, they may have been underage drinking, and you have to put that on your application because they run background checks on you. So you get a background check run on you. So even if you stole some candy or something, you need to put that on your application because you have to be upfront. The honesty is just very important. It'll come out.
I can only say that I am so proud to hear, you know, these things come out, because the ethics of medicine is always in threat. And if it only comes from you, that you're pure as you come in, then there's a really hope for it. You know, every application, you know, when we look at an application, we look for a story. It's like a well-written essay. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's continuity to it. Continuity in your vision on why you're doing what you're doing, a continuity with who you are, and at what point in time, in what points in your life and time has made you who you are. And these are very important things for us to get an idea about what kind of person you are, who is ready for a life of service. If you're here for money, there's much easier ways of doing it. All right? This is not about that. You have to feel like this is a calling for you, and you have to be able to communicate that clearly to us in a way that we can understand and appreciate, and at that point in time, you know, you're in the running.
I might add one other aspect. I'm sure we will eventually get to letters of recommendation as you're working your way through, and I think people need to be aware that one of the things that makes a weak application is a damaging statement in one of your letters. And the worst part about that is every school is getting that letter. You know, if you have a bad interview at one place, you might have a good interview somewhere else. If you have certain interests that don't appeal to one school, they might appeal to another school. But if somebody says something harsh about you in a letter, every school's going to throw that file aside. And in fact, I'm surprised every year that there are always good applicants who say, I don't know, my file was so strong, I had such a good application, I didn't get in anywhere, what happened? And they don't stop to think to themselves, I bet it was a letter. Think about the people who write your letters. Know them well and have confidence in what they're going to say. And in particular, if anybody shows the slightest hesitation to write a letter for you,
Believe them.
you sit down with them, you come with your form, you want them to write a letter, you're hoping you'll get that task done today, and they say something like, isn't there someone who knows you better than I do, who might write a letter? What they're saying to you is, go away right away. Take that piece of paper and take it to someone else. No one's going to look you in the face and say, I don't like you, I'm going to write a bad letter. So if you get the slightest hint that they're uneasy, go away.
Amen.
That's great advice.
If I may just add just one thing, and you know, and a good letter
Believe them.
is not a letter that just talks about, you know, how well you did in their class. It has to be a letter that really bats for you. So it has to be somebody that is going to actually say, this is a person that I would like to be my physician when they grow up. So it has to be that kind of a letter. So you have to look, you know, and cultivate. I mean, you have to cultivate your letter writers, you know, in long term.
So your original question was what could be damaging in the essays that you wrote, and I want to address that. So I think there's three things that you should consider. One is if arrogance comes through in your essays, that the committees will not like that. If your statements are also very naive, that is very not deep enough so that to think that you've made a rash decision, that would not also play very well in most of our committees. And lastly, you have to think that you are providing both a general essay to AMCAS as well as specific essays to each of our schools. And to the degree that your personal values and what you hope to get out of your career in medicine match the mission of the school, you will be judged in that way. And so we tend to make very mission-specific decisions on who comes to Stanford, as most of our schools do. I mean, we have both an obligation to our school as well as an obligation to society, and we take both very seriously. Ultimately, we're making decisions based on academic readiness, personal qualities, and life experiences. And if the kinds of life experiences and personal qualities that you bring are not reflected in what your letter writers say about your personal qualities and your life experiences, then that's also not, as David alluded to, a situation in which you want to find yourself in.
No, it's an excellent point about representing, you know, yourself as honestly as possible and showing why you are wanting to do medicine for a good, well thought out reason. I think that also should be mentioned, the time aspect in applying for medical schools, for thinking out your process but still applying early. Do any of your schools have different ways of looking at the applications based off if they're applying for an MD program, an MD PhD program, or the different options available? I think, if you want to start here?
Our MD PhD process is separate from our MD process. And we had gone through transitions where at one time everybody was admitted to the medical school, and then people from that cohort were selected for the MD PhD program, to where the two programs have operated in separate camps, and one group doesn't really talk about what the other group does. And now we have more of a fused process where there's interviews with both MD applicants and MD PhD applicants. And the MD PhD interview is just a little more extensive with scientists, but the application processes are still separate and handled through the MD PhD or the MSTP office, as well as the MD applications going through the traditional Pritzker admissions committee. The focus of what the MD PhD programs are looking for are qualities that are strong in research and capable of completing the very long program of study. And I think the idea that these people are going to be in labs and they don't have to worry about the humanistic aspects of medicine was what we accepted many years ago. But we understand that these individuals are going to be physicians as well and need to have that component of their thought processes evaluated as well, which is why the two processes have come more tightly aligned. On our campus, we also have a law school. We also have one of the best business schools in the country. We also have a divinity school and a school of public policy. And we've got medical students who've actually applied in each of those. And the way that works is that you apply separately to those individual programs once you start the medical school. And often, I think it benefits you by being on one of the other professional schools on campus to apply to one of the other schools on our campus as well.
The process is somewhat similar at The Ohio State University in regards to dual degree students. Between your second and third year, you can opt to pursue an MPH, an MHA, a JD, and an MBA, so somewhat similar. So not much more to add to that.
At Vanderbilt, we have two separate committees for the two efforts. The MD program receives about 5,000 applications. The MSTP, or the MD PhD program, receives about 500 applications. We really look for, in the MD PhD, individuals who are going to be top scientists, but as was noted, we look for them to also have some humanistic qualities. For the MD, students who apply to the MD program can also be considered for the MD PhD program, and that takes a little bit more review. But we really expect in both situations for students to really have diverse backgrounds and really be interested in the patient.
At Touro University at this time, we only have a Master's of Public Health program, and that application is a separate application. It usually happens concurrently with the medical school application, though anecdotally I'd say that the students who apply for both, if you're accepted into the medical school, I'm sure there is some priority given to that.
All right, and then a little bit more on students' backgrounds. For students that didn't do so well their first time around as an undergrad and went back to do a post-bac degree, how do you look at, I know you get all the records, compare how they did as an undergrad as compared to how they did in later degree programs? I mean, do you take it all into account? Do you wait for the personal statement to explain a little bit more about why they did what they did, or how does that story usually come across to you in your experience? If we want to start at the end with Dr. Berezniak.
The way we do it at LECOM, we look at the student, and we look at the student in a very, very unique way. For instance, the campus that I'm at in Bradenton, Florida, we have problem-based learning curriculum. And so we look at the student a little bit different than if you're in a lecture discussion program on our Erie campus. And so what we do, the students can pick and choose what track they want to go into. And so I think, quite honestly, it gives the students opportunity to look at things through a different lens of learning. Some students do better in one track, some students do better in another track.
I think every school has to make an individual decision about who is academically ready to enter their school and succeed in their school, given the learning environment of their school and the support services that are available at each school. And all of us have to look at an academic record as an individual record and say, this student is ready to come to Stanford, for instance. When we achieve that level of confidence, then we can go forward with that application and look at personal qualities and life experiences. But that's a decision that's an individual decision, and that's a decision that involves trajectory, as was said before, but also involves the ability to say, when this student was faced with upper-level quantitative science, how well did this student do in their ability to succeed in those classes?
At Indiana University, we have a master's program, MSMS, Master of Science in Medical Science, and we take a significant number of students from that program. I guess the easiest way to sum it up is it's a term I've used for a number of years. What have you done for me lately? We tend to pay more attention on what you've done most recently. Now, we do look at the totality of the application, but if you've performed at an exemplary level in a post-baccalaureate program most recently, that tends to weigh more heavily. Or let's just say that during the 4 years of undergraduate, if during the first year you didn't do as well, but I think as someone mentioned that your GPA shows an upward trend to where as a senior you did much better, we tend to pay more attention to that. So it's really what have you done for me lately that we tend to pay more attention to rather than what you've done maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago.
At New York University, I think we do look at everything. And so, you know, if you are in the post-bac program, we go back and look at how you have performed across the years, and in what context have you performed. You know, like all those things are very important. So it's not really a separate thing that we're looking at only grades, but the context of your performance. And obviously, if you're doing well in the post-bac program, again, the question would be in what context are you pursuing your post-bac program as well. So all of those things are taken into consideration to see how are you going to be at NYU. I mean, those are the considerations that come to the fore.
You know, I'm sure there will be differences of opinion on various points on this panel, but I think we will all agree that we're interested in how you can do now, and we're really trying to figure that out. But what I would add to that comment is, for that student who, for one reason or another, had a weak undergraduate record and has now established for us that they can do the work, the other very important ingredient is, what have you done with your life in the interim? It's not just, okay, I had a weak undergraduate record, but now look, I can do the work. That's fine, but you've also had several years to show us what kind of human being you are. And that is at least as important in those instances as the proof that you can do the academic work. Well, as Gabe says, you have to prove you can do the academic work, but it is certainly equally important, what have you done with your life during the interim?
At Vanderbilt, we really look at the student in terms of, as others have noted, where are they on this journey to become a physician? And I can give you a quick example. We had a theater major who applied this year, and they finished their degree in theater. He then decided that he was going to teach, so he taught at several minority-serving institutions for a while. And then he decided he was going to become a physician, and he did a post-bac course. And then he interviewed, and I talked with him before he interviewed, and then he came to the committee, and he will be accepted to the program on October 15th when we can begin to send out letters. because his trajectory and his interests are just outstanding. But at the beginning, he was in theater, and he's a great actor, but he really is going to be a great physician.
I'm not sure I can add too much from the excellent comments that's been given by this panel on this topic. The only thing I can really say to you is that, you know, a physician has to have an incredibly strong character. And when people have struggles in their lives, how they handle those struggles, face those, and overcome those is a determination of their character and who they are. And for that, that can actually be a really an asset for us to see what kind of person you are.
At The Ohio State University, we actually have a post-baccalaureate program called MedPath that has been in existence since 1991. We have just had some fantastic graduates from that program serving underserved communities in both primary care, and just last year, one of our post-bac graduates was the president of Alpha Omega Alpha. We also have a post-bac graduate who is now a neurosurgery resident at the school up north. And so post-baccalaureate programs have really added a great value to us being to reach students and to seek excellence through diversity.
I just want to add one thing. When you're making the decision about whether you need to go to a post-baccalaureate program or whether you should apply to medical school or what you should be doing in the interval to make yourself a better candidate, I would still seek the advice of my pre-medical advisor. And not everybody uses their pre-medical advisor to the fullest extent. And so I think they have a good idea of where your strengths are and potentially where programs that might be better suited for you could be. And a lot of people kind of break off that relationship once they leave campus, or maybe even before they leave campus with their pre-medical advisor, because they think they've disappointed them in some way because they haven't scored as well as they should have in classes, or they didn't take their advice at some point. You can always go back. And their role is to try to help you figure out what you need to do in order to get your best application forward. And they have often insights and experiences that can be very helpful to you, even if you developed a poor relationship with them when you started. Think about them as a resource on your campus when you go back to them.
And Dr. McDougall, is it a general policy, I don't know whether as a test to see how interested in your applicants are in the field of medicine and in health policy? Do you ask questions about what's going on in their state or in the country for what's going on, just for what's going to affect them as a physician?
That's a great question, and it again ties to the importance of the personal statement. And when you have students coming to the table with varied life experiences, speaking to perhaps their experience and their family's experience, interfacing with the healthcare system, perhaps maybe being uninsured at the time, the discussions are just rich and fantastic, and especially if they could connect that to what impact they want to make to solve those problems. And that's where, when you go into these interviews and so forth, I know a lot of times when people speak to diversity, they look at it more, well, it's just an affirmative action program and all this type of thing. No, there is a big change, a paradigm shift, a new recognition that diversity is power. Diversity leads to innovation. Diversity is synonymous with excellence. So don't go into those interviews with your head hanging low and so forth, because we need you to solve all these myriad of health problems. If it could have been solved before, it would have been. It hasn't been. You're missing from that puzzle. So we need you to really move forward our missions at our individual academic medical centers.
Does anyone else have anything to add on, in interview questions, how to ask questions about their interest in health policy and how important or not important that is for applicants to be aware or be active in?
I think if the applicant has a strong background in policy and, in fact, a significant part of the life experiences that they've brought to the application are in the policy realm, that applicant should be prepared to get a lot of questions on health policy during a non-structured interview. And we have traditionally done that. I mean, the whole purpose of the interview is really to authenticate the person as to the fact that what they've said about their quality of their life experiences and personal qualities in their essays is what you see when you have the individual in front of you. So I would think that this is something we teach in school. This is something you will eventually become an expert in. It's very important to do it. I don't expect you to be an expert in anatomy when you come into medical school. In fact, in some ways, I hope you're not. I hope that what you bring to school is expertise in all of those areas that are upstream from medicine that actually are the things that make us unhealthy individuals. And so I'd rather you be an expert on behaviors, on the physical environment, on the social environment, than in fact that you just take courses that you're ultimately going to take later.
I would just add that in many ways the life experiences that you write about in your application that you share with us is some kind of a context of your social engagement. So, I mean, so those are the very important aspects of who you are and why you want to be a physician. So, so those things are definitely, even if they're not asked specifically at interviews, they're discussed in that context. And we want to find out what your social engagement is going to be in the future. That makes you, like interested in being a physician.
I think that the overall consideration that many interviewers at medical schools have is how informed are you? And from that point of view, I think it's extremely important to read the newspaper, be familiar with current events, be familiar with issues that relate to health and medicine, and relate even outside of health and medicine. Because once you're in a room interacting with a group of people or one individual, they can ask you questions that touch on a wide variety of areas.
All right, I think this will be our last question. I will start it off with Dr. McDade. And it's about, I mean, we talked earlier, we had a theater major applying to medical school and how it doesn't matter what your major is, as long as you've met the prerequisites in taking the proper health courses. How much do you, when looking at an application, weigh then the different grades that they get based off of it in an OChem class versus their theater class? And I mean, that could shift the GPA one way or another, depending on what their major was, and do you only look at the science classes more, or is it, as we've been talking about, more on the character of the person, what they were interested in?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think that one of the benefits that we have by having medical students on our admissions committee is that many of these students have experiences at the universities from which our applicants come. And so they can tell us if this is kind of a lightweight course or if this is a really rigorous course and that nobody gets an A in this person's course or whatever. And it's often very interesting to hear the students comment on the rigor of the particular curriculum that a student has chosen. So we like to see excellence in something. And if it's in academics, that's fine. If it's in a non-academic field, then that's fine too. The prerequisites for medical school, the biology, introductory biology, organic chemistry, general chemistry, and physics are things that actually matter to a larger extent. That you've shown excellence in your non-science courses, I think is also important to us because it shows us some degree of discipline that you may have. But I think that we want to make sure that you can handle our coursework in medical school, and to some extent, although not a very good gauge, the proficiency in those prerequisite courses help to suggest that. I also think we use a word in our admissions committee called Shakespeareopenia. That is, people who actually go through science courses or engineering courses in particular and never get a chance to take literature courses that help to round out their ability to interact with people in a humanistic fashion. And so we talk about an applicant who is Shakespeareopenic by someone who's never had an English course or maybe one English course the entire time they're in college. So we do look at your mix of classes. We look at the number of honors classes that you've taken, the number of A+s that you've gotten, and things like that kind of factor in when we look at your transcript.
One of the things that I'm glad Dr. McDade made mention was the role of students on our committees. I'm sure many of us have students on our committees, and so you should be prepared for that. The students on the committees are very bright, and they actually participate and play a very important role. A student can actually make a comment that will either have someone invited to the class, or as once I remember a young lady said, "I really like this student. They are the type of person that I would like as a classmate." And going back to one of the first points that we made at the beginning, service, once I had a discussion with one of the students on our committee, and she said, "I'm not sure how you feel about this student, but I'm going to really vote against them because there is absolutely no evidence of service at all, and I won't support a student who doesn't have some type of commitment and demonstrate that type of commitment." So I think it's important for you to keep in mind that there will be students who are in medical school who will play a role in your admission to medical school.
One comment, it doesn't really matter what your major is, whether it's history, chemistry, biology, what have you, but I think it's been said before by the esteemed members of this panel that it's the quality of the courses that you take that's really important. And the AMCAS application breaks it down in terms of the science courses, your GPA for the science, and then the AO, the all other, are your non-science courses. One of the things in my experience serving on our admissions committee is that some students who tend to be non-science majors take the bare minimum. The BCPM, the biology, the chemistry, the physics, and the math, they don't take additional coursework over and above that. And so sometimes, not always, but sometimes that puts you at a disadvantage when you start medical school. So one of the recommendations that I make to students who are non-science majors is that you do the prerequisites, but you also take some courses over and above that, maybe a biochemistry course, 1 year or 1 semester, maybe a physiology course and some of the other courses, because I think it stands you well and puts you in good stead once you get into medical school.
And may I just add, I agree with everything that's been said. Also, it's not a requirement, but it's highly recommended, and it's now in our brochure in regards to admissions. If you have the opportunity to take an anatomy class, no matter what your major is, it would be very helpful for you in regards to transitioning to medical school, and I think most folks here would agree with that.
We're actually out of time now. If anybody else wanted to make any more comments, I apologize.
Okay.
But I'd like to give all of our speakers up here a round of applause.